I'm about to batch sew 4 pairs of cigarette pants at the same time. I can almost guarantee that about 3 hours into this project, I'm going to regret this idea, but I know it'll be worth it in the end because I've been wanting to sew these pants since I first talked about buying this fabric and batch sewing these pants last fall. So here's my plan for how I'm going to sew 4 pairs of pants at the same time. I already hate this idea. I'm going to use the same pattern for all 4 pairs, Butterick B5895, which is an out-of-print Gertie cigarette pants pattern from about a decade ago. It's a pattern that I'm really familiar with fitting since I've made lots of versions of this and tweaked this pattern along the way. So even though I've been thinking I'd like to try a new cigarette pants pattern at some point, I think I've been saying that for about 2 years to myself, see if I'd like to fit better. For this purpose, I'm just going to use an old standby. And I'm going to use it without the front pockets. Now initially I was like, oh, I could make these 4 pairs slightly unique or different, do little different embellishments and pockets. And frankly, I just want some wardrobe staples in more colors and hello. And right now I just can't be bothered to think up embellishments or adding pockets or whatnot. So I'm just going to go really straightforward here. Plus I'm actually saving one of the other corduroys to make a corduroy pair of high-waisted jeans. So I'm going to save all of my fussy energy for that. So stay tuned. So for this batch sewing project, I have a gray neutral color thread, and I'm going to use this for all of the seams that won't have top stitching. So basically all the sewing that you can't see. And since this pants pattern is pretty plain, that's going to basically be the leg seams on the side seams and the inseam, the crotch seams, the waistline seam, and the darts. And I'll also use 1 color serger thread to finish off the raw edges on the inside too. And I've got matching thread for each of my fabrics, so I can do the top stitching for the leg hems and the waistband and the lap zipper. And matching or relatively matching zippers. Now for the waistband on pants, I prefer a firm woven cotton fabric for waistband facings, so I just have some kind of random fabrics for my stash. I would usually like these to be a little bit more matching some of these blues, but this is what I got. Now my fabric for these pants is all the same stretch corduroy fabric from Minerva.com. I'll link it in the description. And corduroy obviously has a pile and it's kind of like a thicker fabric. So while in theory, I could cut out all of this fabric in multiple layers, cutting out at the same time, I'm actually not gonna do that for the corduroy, but you could totally do that if you were batch sewing a thinner fabric. And in fact, that's my plan for the waistband facing fabrics. But there's really only 4 leg pieces and 1 waistband piece to cut out in corduroy for each of these 4 pairs, and obviously no print to match up. So I'm going to lay out the first pair, take a photo so I remember the location of each pattern piece when I'm cutting so I don't have to reinvent the wheel for the pattern piece placement on the other 3 pairs, and then I'll just cut them all out individually. I've also taken a stab at jotting down some notes on construction order and when I think I'll need to switch to matching threads, which I've marked with a little pink asterisk. So I've pretty much done everything I can to procrastinate starting this project, so I guess I'm gonna cut out some corduroy now. But first, I wanted to get the waistband facing and interfacing pieces out of the way, so I cut that all out first. It's funny because I don't sew with a lot of solid colored medium weight cotton, so I could tell right off by the shape of the scraps that both the light blue and turquoise I'm using here were obviously last used to cut out waistband facings for other projects. The turquoise was for the pedal pushers I did with the fancy belt loops late in summer last year. I'll link to that video in the description. And it took me a while to remember the light blue, but I once had to redo a waistband facing on a vintage skirt, so it was for that. I'm using fusible tricot, aka knit interfacing here for the waistband pieces. I don't always interface both the facing and the outer pieces for waistbands, but I feel like this corduroy is thin enough that it could use a little bit of support, but the knit weave of the interfacing prevents it from working against the stretch in the stretch corduroy. Now I'm not really sure why, since I go against that all the time and use woven with stretch cottons, but whatever, that's what I'm telling myself for this project. Okay. I take back what I said earlier. After pressing my corduroy fabrics, I realized that they're thinner than I thought that they were. And so I have laid all 4 of them on top of each other, and I think it'll be okay to cut this all out together. Effectively a 1-layer pattern layout, but with 4 layers of fabric for each of the different colors. I'll start with the waistband piece first though, because if it turns out to be more annoying than I think, then I'll scrap that idea and just cut the legs out like I was originally intending. I also have this very fancy little post-it note of an arrow to remind me not to alternate my leg pieces because corduroy is a nap fabric, so the leg pieces need to be cut out all going the same direction. Now technically you can run corduroy up or down, whichever you would prefer. I chose to run it down, but whatever you pick, you got to do it the same for each leg. So I just need this little reminder so that I keep all of my leg pieces going in the same direction. So I think I'm ready to officially start cutting out. And honestly, once I started cutting the fabric out, it really wasn't that bad cutting 4 layers together. Now I couldn't do this with a thicker corduroy, but I took my time and it was okay. And it's just 4 leg pieces and a waistband, so this was pretty easy. I've heard of people batch sewing things like button-down shirts that have lots more pieces, so cutting that out together would be a much bigger endeavor. But I organized myself pretty well with all this and even had a light chalk and a dark removable ink to mark the darts in the various colors of the fabrics, and I was done quicker than I expected. Okay, I am almost ready to start here, so we're going to go on a little walk so I can show you how I have things set up for this batch sewing project. So I have my leg pieces all labeled so I could keep track of them, and I'm planning to sew these each seam that I sew from the lightest color to the darkest color and then clean up a little bit afterwards because corduroy fabric sheds like crazy. Even these pieces have little bits from the other pieces all over them. So I have a lint roller over on my ironing board, and also you can just use a piece of corduroy to wipe it up as well. A little scrap is perfect for that. So I have these all organized. I have my sewing machine loaded up with my gray neutral thread and a full bobbin and my walking foot, which is really critical to prevent crushing of seams for corduroy, or at least help prevent it. I have my zippers and bobbins ready and my matching threads for all of the top stitching work that I need to do. I have gray thread in my serger. And over here on my cutting board, I have my interfacing pieces cut out. I have my waistband facings and my waistband pieces. I have my all-important lint roller for corduroy. I also have a little metal tool that I sometimes slip into seam allowances when pressing corduroy so that I don't leave a mark from the seam allowance line, and also a press cloth, which comes in handy when pressing corduroy too. So I think I'm ready to start this corduroy party. Do I actually think that this is going to be a party? No! Now, before anybody asks, I did talk about the fluff and mess that you can get when sewing with corduroy. And the reason that I don't actually just finish off the raw edges of my pieces with my serger before I start cutting to kind of prevent some of that is because I prefer, after I sew a seam, to trim and serge the seam allowances together and press them to one side as opposed to pressing them open. So that's why I don't do that. So just a little bit of cleanup for myself as I go along, but not that big of a deal and worth it for corduroy. So off we go, starting with interfacing all 8 waistband pieces. Never mind that I always check if I have the glue side up or down, I still managed to get it wrong on 2 of them and started to fuse it to my press cloth, but not enough that I couldn't just flip it over and repress. Meanwhile, I was thinking about the fact that I don't think I even have enough pins to pin 4 sets of leg seams at the same time, but I guess we'll cross that bridge eventually. But I definitely have enough pins for all the waistline darts and the waistband though, so that was up next. Since this pattern out of the envelope has scooped front pockets, which I've omitted, there aren't front darts, so thankfully only 8 darts total to pin and sew here. I mean, honestly, my most used 1960s pants pattern has 8 waistline darts for 1 pair, so let me tell you, I'm glad I'm not using that one to batch sew. I also pinned the top seam of the waistband to the waistband facing, and then stacked everything by color to sew next. So I had the waistband seam and the darts on both back leg pieces, so 3 pieces total to sit down and sew in each color. Pressing corduroy needs a bit of delicacy. These are all using feather wale corduroy though, so the ribs are pretty small and not as liable to be crushed too badly, I think. But I use a light hand and a lot of steam, and sometimes you'll see me finger pressing right along the seam line to flatten it gently, sometimes with or without a press cloth. I kind of approach each seam differently depending on what's needed and how I feel the fabric is going. You know, you kind of learn about your fabric's needs as you go along with the project. Here's where I'm at with things. I have the darts pressed, and I have the front and back crotch seam of the legs pinned on all 4 pieces. So those are all ready to sew. And I've been keeping track on my little list here of what God, there's so much corduroy fluff. I've been keeping track on my list of what I have completed just to keep me a little bit more organized. So I'm going to sew the crotch seams next, and then things are going to slow down for a bit because I'm going to insert the zipper into the left side of the pant legs. And it's just easier to do it when the pant legs are open and not completely sewed shut. And since I'm doing 4 of them, I figure let's do it the easier way. So I'll be doing that next, and that's the first time I'm going to have to swap to the individual color thread when I get to the top stitching for the zipper. So it'll slow down for a while, and then I should be able to pick back up when I can resume my neutral color thread. But first, with the neutral color thread, I will sew all these crotch seams. So on to sewing endless crotch seams and lint rolling along the way, and trimming down and serging the raw edges together on my serger. I did all but one of these seams before realizing that I must have threaded my serger a bit wonky since my tension was off, so I did have to stop and fix that. And then once all the serged seams were pressed, and hey, that's now 8 less raw edges to shed all over, it's prep time for the zippers. I always add fusible knit stay tape to reinforce both sides of a seam where I'm doing a zipper, which is admittedly a bit more annoying when it's 8 pieces and not just 2 pieces. Thought I'd stop and just give you a quick update while I am pressing stay tape. I think this is going pretty well so far. Keeping everything really organized has helped. Obviously, it's a pain, it being corduroy, because I'm constantly cleaning up corduroy fuzz. But once I have the seams finished, then obviously that will no longer be an issue. But I hate to say that I'm kind of enjoying it. I probably shouldn't say that because the next thing I'm going to be doing is the zippers, and I guarantee you I am not going to enjoy inserting 4 zippers in a row. Guarantee. I think I talked about this in my pedal pushers video last fall, but I'm using a different method for lap zipper installations for pants than I do for dresses. And yes, I do plan on doing a full tutorial on each of these someday. In this method, I baste shut the seam to the zipper stop and then sew the rest of the leg seam and trim down the seam allowances before sewing the underlap side of the zipper. Man, there's a lot of zipper prep when you're doing 4 zippers, and I haven't even gotten to the zippers yet. But here is where all 4, thank you iron, here's where all 4 pants sit. I have the left side seam sewed. I have the zipper area sewed but with a basting stitch and pressed open, and I have all of the raw edges finished with my serger. So I'm now ready to do the zippers. While I'm going to do the zippers, I am also going to understitch all of my waistbands because of my nice little list of notes. I know that I'm going to change threads now, and I'm going to be working exclusively in the actual matching color thread for a minute. So I'm going to do everything that I can in the matching color thread, which is just doing the stitching for the zipper, for the top stitching, and for the underlap side, and also the understitching for the waistband. So I'm going to go do that 4 times. First up, using a zipper foot to sew the underlap side of the zipper, which attaches to the back leg. Then a break to press that and mark the bottom edge of where I'll top stitch the lap zipper, the little corner where you turn, which is on the front leg. Then swapping out to my walking foot to top stitch the lap. I love using a walking foot for top stitching lap zippers, and it's one of the reasons I use longer zippers so they can hang off the edge and the stop doesn't get stuck under the walking foot. And then I just needed to unpick the basting stitches and understitch the waistband. And I did this for all 4 legs in exactly this order, so I only changed thread once for each pair. Et voila, 4 lap zippers. I feel like I should win some prize for 4 perfect looking lap zippers in these pants. I mean, there's plenty of other things that could still go wrong, but I'm very pleased about these zippers. I did not once attach the fusible stay tape to the wrong pant leg or do the zipper on the wrong side or mess up the zippers at all. So they're done and I can move on to sewing the rest of the leg seams. Trying to maximize my time at every station, I pinned and then sewed the right side seam on all the pairs next and serged and pressed them. So while I was pressing, I also pressed the waistband now that it was understitched. And that included pressing up the seam allowance on the facing for the way that I construct waistbands for pants. And the last stop on the what seems like infinite leg sewing train is sewing the inseams. So that is all I have left on these 4 legs, is sewing and finishing them off on the serger before I can move on to the waistline and then try these on. And once the inseam is sewed and closed up, it makes the legs more difficult to press, obviously, so slipping a sleeve roll inside is super handy. And while no one is ever going to see the intersecting crotch seam, it's always satisfying if you get it lined up perfectly. Okay, the inseam is finished on all 4 of these pairs. Now, these 2 are the same fabric but different colors, and then these 2 are the same fabric and different colors. So I anticipate that they will fit slightly different. So when I get all the waistbands attached, I'm going to try these 2 on and then transfer any changes to these 2. And I anticipate that I will need to make some changes, but I'm also wanting the leg length to be shorter for the lighter color pairs and a little bit longer for the darker color pairs. So this will give me 2 different fabrics and 2 different leg lengths to transfer to the other 2, and hopefully that will all go well. So on to the next few steps on the waistbands before I can try things on. So that's sewing the waistline seam where the outer waistband piece attaches to the legs and pressing that seam up towards the waistband and grating it. Misdirected annoyance earlier. I thought it was the zippers that I wasn't going to look forward to. No, the zippers were fine. It's the waistbands. I keep thinking, why is this project taking so long? And then remembering this is really 4 projects. So if I have 3 things to do on something, that's actually 12 things to do. Last step on the waistband after sewing the waistline seam and before closing it up is I need to flip the facing over to the right side and stitch in line with the edge on the lapped zipper side, and then stitch on the underlap side. This is the back side. If I was going to use a button, I could make that a little bit longer. Probably could have gone a little shorter, doesn't really matter. And then after I fold that in, I'll have a nice sharp little corner there, and I can top stitch my waistband on and continue to pick fuzz. Blech. But before top stitching, it's time to try the pants on and see what I'd like to change fit-wise in the legs since I'm using stretch woven fabrics. And I'm not showing you this part because it's a lot of me standing around and sewing in my underwear trying these on a lot. But after taking the calves in a bit and shortening the leg length, I could finally finish things up. And all that's left is closing up the waistband and hemming the legs. I mean, I do say all that's left as if that's quick, but pinning 8 legs for hems and pinning shut 4 waistbands takes a long time. And I am officially at the last step on the sewing machine. I have each pair with the waistband pinned shut and the hems pinned, which means thank goodness there's no more corduroy shedding. It was particularly bad for the hems on the pants that I had to try on. Oh God, was it everywhere. Anyway, I have all that pinned. I even had to use glass head pins for one of the legs of this pair because I ran out of pins. But now I am off to finish these up on the sewing machine and then hooks and eyes. Ugh. But even the prospect of hooks and eyes couldn't dampen my excitement at finishing each pair on the sewing machine. I mean, this was a lot to get through. But am I happy with this batch sewing experiment in the end? Absolutely. I sewed not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 pairs of cigarette pants. Yay! Of course, that means it took 4 times the work and the time and the supplies cost, but now I have more basics in my closet that I know I'll wear a ton. Keeping myself organized, particularly doing a checklist, worked out great, and I don't think I'd really do anything differently if I tried this again in the future. I tend to sew in small chunks at a time, occasionally mixed in with larger sessions, so that kept this all from feeling too overwhelming. On my YouTube short about this project, somebody said that they batch sewed more difficult patterns so that they have to read the patterns less overall, which I thought was a brilliant reason to try batch sewing. I do sew and wear a lot of vintage inspired jeans, and those are very detailed projects, so I might have to try this with jeans someday. Meanwhile, you can watch one of these 2 videos, and I'm gonna go continue cleaning up corduroy fluff until the end of time.